Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel to another interview with someone who I never had before on my channel. But before I will introduce you to my guest, just a quick reminder to join my mailing list, which is important because many topics that we will be discussing is quite controversial for the mainstream, of course. And if you want to support my channel, check out my Patreon. There is PayPal link down below, my books on my website, and also follow me on Instagram for more normal content as far as no stress. So today, for the first time, I have a guest who, and I have to give a brief story why we are having this conversation, because this gentleman, Garry Giuffre, emailed me after my very recent trip to Rome. When I came back from Rome, I received an email, and I received quite some number of emails from my viewers, which I appreciate. However, I don't invite all those who email me to have a conversation with on my channel. And the reason why I have Garry with me today is because he sent me very, very important email with informations regarding Rome, Vatican, Pope, United States involvement, and things of that nature, which I'm sure my audience would appreciate hearing about what was really taking place. So welcome, Garry. It's a pleasure to have you on my channel and to have this conversation with you.
It's great to visit with you, Anya. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely perfect. And what I would like to start with, I have some questions. However, I want this conversation to be fully with open mind from myself, because I haven't done this extensive research, of course, as you did for many years of your life. What really happened in 1955?
Okay, well, are we talking about 55 or are we talking about 58?
Well,
I mean, a lot of things happened in 55, but the key date in my mind is 26 October 1958.
Okay, let's start there.
Okay, so the Cardinals assembled in the Sistine Chapel for the first day of balloting, and it had already been predicted by numerous publications going back to 1957 in the American Weekly magazine, which was a pullout section in the Houston Post at that time. And I have a copy of it, which my grandmother gave me back then. She said, hey, this might be of interest to you. It was an article by Jim Bishop, the famous author of the book, The Day Christ Died. And the title of the article was, Who Will Be the Next Pope? And it mentioned a number of cardinals, but the one that really stood out was Joseph Cardinal Siri of Genoa, Giuseppe Siri. And the reason for this is because he was known as an expert negotiator. He had settled more labor management disputes on the docks of Genoa, the port city, than anyone else was able to. He operated also during World War II and afterwards soup kitchens. He was very much concerned about the plight of the poor and displaced in Italy. And frankly, he was the most popular cleric in Italy after Pope Pius XII. And in fact, he was the Pope's preferred successor. And this was well known. And so he was the leading papabile going into the conclave. And so what I found out since then is that he was indeed elected on the fourth ballot of the 58 conclave. And here's a picture of him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then he accepted office. He took the name Gregorius XVII. The white smoke came up, announcing the Pope had been elected. And then after a few minutes, the smoke turned to gray. And here's a picture of it. Matter of fact, we have some French state film footage of that. And it was very confusing. Vatican radio had already announced that the Pope had been elected. Secretaries of the Cardinals, according to the UPI, had appeared at the windows of the Apostolic Palace, and they were waving handkerchiefs to the crowds below, indicating the Pope had been elected. Vatican radio said there was no doubt about it because of the white smoke and also of the great volume of smoke and the length of time it had come out. And then the Palatine Guard and the Swiss Guard came out of their barracks to march to St. Peter's Square, to the piazza, to await the announcement of the new Pope's name. And no Pope came out. And then we had this gray smoke coming up. And then it turned white again. And people sort of breathed a sigh of relief. And then it turned gray, and then white, and then gray, back and forth. Very, very strange, very bizarre. And the London tablet even said that any temporary difficulty could only have been some technical snafu, because they said the stove that they burned the ballots in with the dry straw is simple enough to be operated by a child. And the way this works, in case people don't know, when the Pope has been elected, they take all the ballots of the cardinals, that's the written pieces of paper, they put their name of the cardinal they want to be Pope, and they mix that with dry straw, and they burn that in the Sistine Chapel stove, and it sends white smoke up the chimney. And to create a darker color, they mix wet straw in there, and it'll come up gray or black. And so there were, after 5 full minutes of white smoke, there was these gray puffs, and then went back to white again, and then gray, and then white. And nobody could quite figure out what had happened. And there had already been announcements all over the world that the Pope had been elected. And they said, we'll just have to wait until the lights come on in the Hall of Benedictions before, and when the cardinals come out on the papal balcony, before we know that the Pope has really been elected. And of course, nothing happened. After, and even though the people out in the piazza were yelling, Bianco, Bianco, e vive il Papa, and yet no Pope came out. So after about 20 minutes, then doubt began to creep in. And then after 30 minutes, the crowd began to disperse. It wasn't until many, many years later that I interviewed Father Jean-Marie Charroux, who was a Vatican official at that time living in London, England. He was offering the Latin Mass at St. Ethelreda's Church in Ely Place, London. St. Ethelreda's is a very historic church. One of the first places where the Mass was allowed to be offered in public in England after the Catholic Emancipation Act. In any case, he told me, yes, well, what happened was Siri was elected, he accepted office, and then there was a threat brought against him and the Vatican itself. And I said, well, what was the nature of the threat? And of course, he didn't want to talk about that. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, there were some cardinals that came and ordered the ministers to change the materials in the stove from the dry straw to wet straw. And they wouldn't do it. So these cardinals started putting that material in on their own. And the ministers who were loyal to the newly elected Pope then got back control of the stove, and they started putting in dry straw, and this created white smoke again. So there was a shoving match, almost a fist fight for control over this over the stove. And Siri himself said, I could write books about the various conclaves. Many horrible things have happened. And so, so what happened then? Well, a threat was brought to bear against the new Pope. The nature of the threat was a hydrogen bomb on the Vatican. And a lot of people have tried to dance around this, but Malachi Martin himself gave the game away in 1990 in his book, The Keys of This Blood. And he said that a threat was brought against the Pope-elect, or in this case, he said Siri. He actually identified Siri as the one who had, well, he called him the leading candidate. And he said that the threats concerned the very existence of the Vatican City State, its members and dependents. Well, now, what could make the Vatican City State, what could make its existence go away other than a hydrogen bomb? Many years later, in 1972, Siri, writing in the Genoan Ecclesiastical Review on a 2-page article about the election of the Roman pontiff, said that the world powers have extraordinary means and extraordinary techniques by which they are now able to set aside the very substance of conclave law. And he said they would be motivated by that very result to interfere in the conclave, which they did. And why? And why then? Why did they interfere in that election at that point? You see, there's always been, well, not always, but for many years, there was this concept of the veto. The veto whereby, say, a Catholic monarch would be in opposition to this cardinal or that cardinal, maybe because he didn't like his politics, maybe because the cardinal was from a country that the king didn't like, or this or that. And the last time the veto was entered into a conclave was in 1903. Cardinal Puznia of Krakow issued the veto of Franz Joseph, who was the Austrian emperor, against Cardinal Rampolla, who had been Secretary of State under Pope Leo XIII. Rampolla had sided with France in its conflict with Austria. And so Franz Joseph did not like Rampolla. So during the balloting, Rampolla, among the 70 cardinals who were participating, received, I think it was 24 votes. And then on the second ballot, I think he received 29 votes. And I believe after the second ballot, then the cardinal had instructions from the emperor to enter the veto to express his displeasure over Rampolla's potential ascendancy. And at this time, the veto was such an archaic practice and was very much rejected by the cardinals. So they held a third ballot, and the cardinals were so mad at Franz Joseph that they gave Rampolla another vote. So he ended up with 30 votes on the third ballot of that conclave. The problem was that he needed, I think he needed 45 or 50 votes. So he was way short of what he needed. And the main problem for Rampolla was that he was a career diplomat. And what the cardinals normally look for is someone with pastoral experience as a parish priest, as a bishop of a diocese. And that's not what Rampolla was about. He was a diplomat. And so, although a brilliant cardinal and everything, and had rendered a great service to Leo XIII in attempting to get back the control of the papal states during the late 19th century. The cardinals ultimately wanted someone to be pope who had more of a pastoral experience. Well, they ultimately turned to Cardinal Giuseppe Sarto, who was the Patriarch of Venice.
Garry, can I ask you something here? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Because I would really like to know, actually I have 3 questions very early now, because this is very complex story, and we can go back into history, like you bringing up. There is a certain trajectory, right.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you this. First question is, are you sitting in a church, or what is the background behind you? Because I can see Jesus on the cross and I can see the setup. So I'm just curious, because it's behind you.
I am in the choir loft, where we have a control booth, where we have a live stream for our Latin Mass from our church, St. Jude's, that goes worldwide every Sunday.
Okay, great.
We have people in Poland watching, you know.
Second question is, who showed up in that window after the smoke was going gray and white backward? Ultimately, who showed up?
Nobody.
Okay.
Nobody showed up. Nobody showed up for another 2 days. But I'll go back. I'll finish up with Rampolla.
Now,
so in any case,
one more question I had. One more question. Sorry. Now this threat with the bomb that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
This was coming from United States?
Apparently, yes.
And is this okay? So now, why it was coming from United States, and who exactly wants to destroy Vatican? That is, actually, I have a lot of things in my feelings about Vatican, and I'm in, Polish, so it's also very complex for me. But those are my questions. So nobody showed up for 2 days, and then who was trying and why to set that bomb there?
Well, I'll get to that. Okay, so let me just finish with the story about Rampolla and Sarto. So ultimately, Sarto was elected. Reluctantly, he accepted office, and he became Pope Pius X, and was later canonized. One of the first things he did was forever abolish the veto. And so the most recent papal legislation we have on that dates back to 1903, completely disallows any kind of intervention by any political authority to veto the election of a pope. If that's attempted, it's totally invalid. It was only reserved to the 3 Catholic monarchs of Spain, France, and Austria in any case. And by 1903, there were only functioning monarchies in Austria, and I guess to some extent in Spain. But that's a controversy there in itself, and it's another story. But in any case, so fast forward from 1903 to 1958, and 55 years later. So yes, what was the business of the United States? What did that have to do with who's going to be elected Pope? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen the book Overthrow by Stephen Kinzer. It's about the long career of John Foster Dulles, U.S. Secretary of State. It is said by Kinzer, and I think he proves his point, that Dulles overthrew more heads of state than any other man in history. There was a sequel written by Kinzer called The Brothers, and it was about John Foster Dulles and his brother Allen Dulles, who was CIA director. And these two worked hand in glove overthrowing governments. I remember, when I was in school, we read about them overthrowing Trujillo in Dominican Republic. They overthrew Qasem Abdul Qasim, who was president of Iraq. They overthrew Shombe in the Congo. I mean, so many they overthrew, and they continue to do this. They even overthrow Batista in Cuba, and actually help Castro take over Cuba. And because they don't really have any principles, they don't care if they're communists or not communists, as long as they play ball with Washington. And they knew they were going to have a problem with Giuseppe Siri. I mean, Siri was an anti-communist, no doubt about it. But he had been approached by the Soviets during the Hungarian uprising This was another incredible US scam, Hungarian uprising. The US authorities contacted or sent out messages by way of shortwave radio to the Hungarians, telling them, rise up, overthrow your Soviet occupiers, and we will send you arms and equipment and supplies. Does that sound familiar to you? And so the Hungarians did that. They had, well, let's see, what did they have? They had Molotov cocktails, and they would throw those at the Soviet tanks. They didn't have much in the way of guns or ammo, but they were confident the Americans were going to come with that. And so in the meantime, they're getting shot up and killed, and they're sending back shortwave messages. Okay, Uncle Sam, we're fighting our Soviet oppressors. Where are these supplies you promised us? So finally, a U.S. plane lands in Budapest, and the freedom fighters get on board, and they break open these crates, and what do they find? Powdered milk. The U.S. set them up. They set them up. And it's a little bit similar to what they're doing in Ukraine right now. The U.S. couldn't care less about the Ukrainians. They are using them as cannon fodder against the Russians. And they've done this over and over and over again. Pope Pius XII realized shortly before he died that the term the free world was a fraud. He said they are nothing of the sort. And if I had the book, I could quote you exactly what he said. But I think his protege, Giuseppe Siri, also understood this. And so during that Hungarian crisis, I remember that too. My mom was afraid we were going to get blown to bits back then. That shows you how old I am. The Soviet consulate approached Syria about mediating some kind of peace talks. And so years and years later, he was still being contacted by them. As late as 1974, he was received by the Kremlin in his full Cardinal's regalia to discuss with them these disarmament negotiations that were going on with the U.S. Because he said, although I'm anti-communist, he said, I do believe that the Soviet Union has rights. And he says, if they enter into a disarmament treaty with the Americans, nuclear disarmament treaty, and France is not part of it, France has all these American arms, nuclear bombs, delivery systems, missiles, launch pads aimed at Russia. They can knock out dozens of Russian cities, and they're not part of the negotiations. He said that a treaty like that is meaningless. So they understood he was an honest broker. Well, the State Department didn't want a pope like that. No way. And as a matter of fact, there is a State Department document. I didn't bring it with me. I wish I had, but we can make that available if anybody wants to see it. Any of your viewers that want to see it, I'll send you the PDF or even links to it, where they express great concern about either Siri, Ruffini, or Ottaviani becoming pope. They said they have an unrealistic view of the problems in the world today. But there was actually something far deeper that was behind this whole thing. It wasn't just political. There were some dark forces that wanted to silence the church, and more than silence it, put something else in its place. That's when I wrote to you and you said on your brief travelogue in Rome, you said, I didn't go in the Vatican and you hesitated. You said, it's the epicenter of evil. And I wrote
can I add here, Garry? And I'm so glad you actually listened to that, because I'll be honest with you. When I was going to Rome, I knew that a lot of my viewers will appreciate, because I'm very energy sensitive. I'm an empath, and I sense energy. And I knew a lot of people would be interested in how I feel entering certain areas there or exploring it. And when I was approaching Vatican, when I was actually standing in the middle of the square, I felt absolutely zero desire to come any closer, to go inside, to explore, to do anything, literally anything with this place. And I turned around and I left. I actually did like stories on my Instagram. I was there. And I think the reason for it is because it's not just what I was coming across recently, the informations about what things were taking place there, which again, some people believe, some people don't, but it was the energy of the place and I just couldn't do it. So thank you for actually emailing me and listening to that video.
Well, Anya, we would call that a signal grace. Quite frankly, your Catholic radar went off. And I assume that since you are from Poland, you were probably raised a Catholic. And in Poland, there were bishops that were still ordaining priests in the valid rite of holy orders, way after it had been abandoned by the clergy and the bishops in other countries. And that's a whole nother issue. But tradition is very strong in Poland. And so you probably reflect that in your, in your outlook toward the church, and you probably had a certain sense, or they would call it bad vibes, whatever you want to say. I say it's the operations of grace in the soul, where you felt this great evil emanating from those buildings. And I tell you what, you're not alone, because in 1846, no less than the Mother of God appeared to two children in La Salette, France, Melanie Calvat and the Maxima Mathieu. And she said that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. Now, that I'm not a Protestant saying that. And I know Luther and all of the Protestant reformers like to refer to the Pope as Antichrist. No. This is an impostor. These are a series of imposters. That is why we have one horrible, scandalous headline regarding the official church, day after day, week after week. And it has been that way ever since the rightful Pope was overthrown and he was replaced by a Masonic usurper in the person of John the 23rd. And I say that I don't have proof that he was actually a card-carrying Mason, but he had certainly many associations that pointed in that direction. I've written extensively on that. I have a chapter in my unpublished manuscript entitled Good Pope John. And it gives all of his affiliations with the lodge and all of the great tributes they made to him at the time of his death, as if he were one of their own. And they had an agenda. And the agenda was to consecrate the errors of the French Revolution, which they did at Vatican II. And this was an incredibly sneaky trick he played on those cardinals. Siri once said, you get all those cardinals locked up in one room in the heat of Rome, they'll put anybody on the throne just to get out. And so after they hit this deadlock, and they knew that they could not proceed with another election. See, according to Canon 2390, if someone is elected to ecclesiastical office, and then because of grave fear or threats or external interference or coercion, they are persuaded, or they're forced to elect someone else, well, the second election's invalid. It's totally invalid. And that's getting to the real sinister part of this thing. You see, they did not want Roncalli to be a valid pope, because you see, as St. James says, that the devils in hell also believe and do tremble. They knew from past experience, when the conclave elected the liberal Cardinal Mastai Ferretti, and the lodge hailed his election all over the world, their jubilation quickly turned to despair because the grace of his office completely turned him around. And he remains to this day one of the most hated popes by the forces arrayed against the church. They did not want that to happen with Roncalli. I believe they give like a general absolution to the cardinals coming into the conclave. He could have accepted that absolution. He could have decided to turn away from all of these dark associations he had, too numerous to mention here. And they would not have had any way of knowing. As a matter of fact, the head of the Carbonari, which is the Italian Freemasonry, a man by the name of Nubius, writing under the pseudonym Pigolo Tigre, he said that if a member of our secrets finds his way into the College of Cardinals, it would be by no means reason for us to wish for his appointment to the See of Peter, for that promotion would destroy us. He would go into that high office knowing all of our secrets, and the need for power that alone would destroy us. So they didn't want Roncalli to be a valid pope. You see, they already had something like, I don't know, at least 10, 15 or more cardinals who were Freemasons. Cardinal Koenig, Leonard, Sunens. All of these guys voted for Siri. He didn't really want it. He actually turned it down. They all voted for him, so that knowing that he knew that if he had a unanimous vote, he could not decently refuse office. This was a principle established long ago during the election of Pope Innocent XI, who didn't want to be Pope. But the theologians at that time said, look, Eminence, you have to accept, because if you do not accept the papacy after a unanimous vote, you will be turning against the obvious will of the Holy Ghost. So finally, on the fourth ballot, when Siri got a unanimous vote, he accepted, and he let it be known that it was already reported in the Houston Post and in his biography by Father Raimondo Spiazzi, that if elected, he would take the name Gregory the 17th, Gregorius the 17th, because of his great admiration for Pope Gregory the 7th. And so we know he went that far. Once he did that, then they brought the threat to bear against him. You see, during the time of the veto in the past centuries, the veto was only brought against candidates for the papacy, not for someone already elected Pope. Mm-hmm. And so they brought this veto, and it wasn't even by a person that in the past whose veto might have been accepted. It was being brought to bear by this secular Masonic government of the United States. And they had no right to interfere with that. But they could, again, John Foster Dulles had just been there a few days before in a meeting with the cardinals when he took leave from a big disarmament conference in Geneva, Switzerland. And his companion was John McCabe, head of the American Atomic Energy Commission. I wonder what that discussion was about. And the U.S. had just set up a missile base at Gioia de Colli, about 80 miles south of Rome. And, there could have been a missile that got fired off accidentally, could have hit the Vatican, oh gosh, we're really sorry about that. In any case, there had been one test after another. I have some newspaper articles. I don't know if I can grab it here, a little bit disorganized.
Yes, Garry, but I want to ask you some more questions here, because sure, you're going into a lot of details, and I know not everyone has been following the popes throughout the history like you did. I want to know, let's break it down to the simple things right now.
Okay, sure.
What really Vatican stands for, okay? What kind of activities they really perform, and what is the future of that whole structure, that city, that country, actually, Vatican, that exists, what it really stands for right now?
Well, right now, the Vatican is totally under the control of the Synagogue of Satan. there was an article run, and I can't even say the title of the article because the YouTube censors will take down this video. It was in 1936. There was a meeting in Paris by a group of high priests of a certain religious and ethnic persuasion that said that before our king can reign in the world, the Pope in Rome must be dethroned. So just as Our Lady of La Salette tried to warn us, Rome will lose the faith, become the seat of Antichrist. So also, the church's scripture scholars, Father Gregory Martin, Father William Allen, Father Thomas Bristow, in translating the Latin Vulgate into English, they included also these lengthy commentaries. And they said that in the latter days, and these are Catholic scripture experts, they said in the latter days that three things would happen. The Pope would be banished from Rome, the chair of Peter would be taken over by Antichrist, and the holy sacrifice of the Mass would be abolished. This is what we traditional Catholics feel has happened. And will Antichrist rule in Rome or Jerusalem? Well, we don't know for sure, maybe both places. Will he be a military leader or a religious leader? Well, who could do more harm to souls? A military leader or a religious leader? One that much of the world thinks is Christ's representative on earth, but is anything but. So the Vatican has been turned into exactly how you described it, the epicenter of evil. Anything that is dedicated to preparing the world for Antichrist is, in my book, that's the epicenter of evil. And I thought, boy, Anya, she's got it figured out exactly, because in 2001,
John Paul II.
Right. In 2001, there was a report that came out from the Vatican's Congregation on the Liturgy, I think was the name of that. The head of it was Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger. And he said that there's going to be another Messiah. And he didn't write the whole 200-page report, but he wrote the entire prologue to it and was responsible for the content. And he said that this Messiah will not be Jesus Christ, but will be someone like him who will have the same characteristics or qualities as the Jesus who has already come and lived and taught amongst us, and that he will be a Messiah to certain people who did not accept him when he came. What I mean, this new Messiah will be acceptable to people that did not accept Christ when he came. That's what he said. But he said it's okay. He says he'll be a legitimate, effective, and salvific for them. And again, we can't really get into that because YouTube will take us down. And these are controversial things, but there is a public record of it. And you will see that in my manuscript once it's published, The Plot Against the Pope, because I've been working on this. I mean, I've been collecting information on this since 1957, and then more recently in 1974, and then very intensely since 1978. And finally,
it's your life's work almost. It's truly your life's work.
It is. It certainly has been, and it's been a major. It's had a major impact on my life. Obviously, I mean, I've had death threats. I should show you a letter I got from Malachi Martin. He was a conspirator. He is held out as as a great defender of the faith, but he was one of the conspirators. I met Malachi and his concubine, Catherine Levanus, and I spent time with him in his apartment. And he was freaked out over this investigation because they couldn't figure out, how did you find out about this? Who's backing you? And I was very vague about this. And I have collaborated with some prominent people. And it's going to come out, I assure you.
That's what thank you for saying this. This was my next question, because I'm really going with the flow.
Yeah,
are we going in our lifetime to see the absolute truth about the truth?
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I mean, I have 26 chapters that are completed. I wanted to include another 14. I don't know if there'll be time for that because the world is getting ready to blow up. But we'll get it out there. We'll get the majority of the information out there. I said I was not going to serialize this, and I think this is not a good idea to serialize something, because you're asking for your electric toothbrush to blow up when you do that. But we'll get it out there. I wish more people, though, had your instincts, though, Anya, because even without this background, you knew that something was wrong.
Well, but can I just say here, Garry?
Sure.
This is coming from someone who, you're born in Poland, majority goes to church. And, as a child, you don't really understand, you're repeating certain things. So as far as the practicing part, right, that was like part of the culture. But I have to say, from the very young age, and I say it aside from the religion, aside from church, I had a very strong sense of connection with God and with the spirit and with angels. And I talked to Jesus. So for me, I'm not talking church now. I'm talking the connection with the creator, with source, with love. So I had this instinct in me, like always. But I want to ask you specifically now about someone who was also very involved in a big historical change. And before I ask you, I want to say this. I will never forget this, Garry. And I was actually taking a walk yesterday to the very park where I went when I believe I was 15 or 16 years old, when John Paul II had the first visit in my hometown. I will never forget, 5 a.m., people gathered. He arrived around like 10, 11. So for hours, we were waiting, okay? Masses of people. Now, in Poland, this will be tough, but he had a certain, reputation. It's John Paul II, right?
Sure.
And then it was the time when there was this negotiation, the Cold War was ending, the Berlin Wall was coming down. We had Reagan, we had Mikhail Gorbachev, and we had Jean Paul II. I know that you have knowledge about that time in history and about that Pope for sure. So what can you tell me? Because I am personally now, regardless my viewers, I'm very curious about that time and about that Pope specifically.
Well, I mean, not to step on any toes of my Polish friends, yourself included, Anya, but from the minute he came out on the balcony, there were questions. I don't know if you saw this, but this was the cover of OG magazine, which is like the Italian version of Time magazine. And, it just shows him as kind of a bohemian vagabond with, in very, very strange situations, which, at the time these pictures were taken, he was supposedly a cardinal. Now, what the heck is this all about? What is this all about? And of course, the article was a real tongue-in-cheek thing written by this journalist for OG saying, isn't he a Pope of the people and all this stuff? Well, of course, it had been rumored that he'd been married. His background was more in acting than it was a priesthood. He was a longtime member of Poland's Rhapsodic Theater. He was only in the seminary 2 years, and somehow they gave him a pass to be ordained after just 2 years of seminary training, which makes no sense. And I was reading in the Houston Chronicle, an article that had first appeared in the Los Angeles Times when he first came out on the balcony. that all through his career, as he rose up through the ranks, at every point, those advancements had to be approved by the Polish Communist Party. And he was allowed to travel all over the world as a bishop, as archbishop, as a cardinal, whereas Cardinal Wyszynski was under house arrest the whole time. 15 years he was under house arrest.
Wyszynski, yes, Wyszynski, correct. Yes.
Yeah, under house arrest. So why was
yes, exactly.
granted media star status and Wyszynski was a prisoner? What was the difference between those? I'll tell you why. Wojtyła was a member of the club. He was part of the team. Wyszynski was not. Wyszynski was a good Catholic cardinal and bishop, and he did not care for Wojtyła at all. And he, I mean,
wow.
From the time that he was, just a priest working on his theological thesis of phenomenology, and then he went up through the ranks. He was always a heretic. He believed in universal salvation. You don't have to believe in Jesus Christ for salvation and all this stuff. Maybe people believe that, but that's not what a Catholic prelate should believe or teach. Certainly that's not what the Vicar of Christ would teach. So we found out that Siri had been elected instead of him as well. Siri was elected 4 times. As a matter of fact, here's an article that was in the newspaper just before Wojtyła appeared on the balcony. It says, "Time could be right for Vatican's eternal second runner." And they were talking about Joseph Siri. Let's see, I have some other ones here. There's one by the liberal priest. Let's see if I can find it here. Well, in any case, there was an article entitled "Bandwagon Rolling for General Archbishop" by Father Andrew Greeley. There was a front page headline: "Unprecedented Cardinal campaigns for the papacy." This was on the main news banner of the Houston Chronicle. And basically, he wasn't campaigning for the papacy. He was trying to answer some of the smears that had been put out against him during those 2 conclaves in 1978. First Luciani and then Wojtyła. And he had said at the time that he thought Wojtyła's election would be a great tragedy for the church. And so what happened during that time, during those many years that Wojtyła was there? Well, seminaries were emptied out, convents were emptied out, parishes were closed and consolidated. I mean, you can't just run around the world being a media star and not defend the Catholic religion. You can't be, well, I mean, I don't know if you saw the book, Peter, Lovest Thou Me, but I mean, it shows him cavorting on stage with this native woman from Papua New Guinea who's naked from the waist up. This woman is allowed to read from the pulpit during a so-called mass, in which he's officiating. Wojtyła, John Paul II, is officiating. In Bombay, he received the mark of the Tilak, the fertility goddess of the Hindus, the mark of Shiva. What is this all about? I mean, my canon law book says that if you participate in pagan worship, I mean, you're automatically excommunicated. And he's, doing this in his white papal cassock. And it was just one scandal after another, after another, after another. And it never seemed to affect his blind followers whatsoever. It was only a handful of Catholics around the world that were calling him out on this stuff. And
and the pedophilia scandal, that was another thing.
They didn't punish any of those people, did they?
Exactly.
Like Father Mercier,
yes.
who was a good friend of his, nothing ever happened to him, did it? And
that's exactly the case.
And in fact, they say that's what finally drove Ratzinger out. There was a pending lawsuit, and he just couldn't handle it, so he left. And so now we have this guy, Bergoglio, who was a total.
But wait, Garry, wait,
Sure.
one more thing. Okay, this whole situation when they were trying to kill him, right? What was it about?
That apparently had something to do with the Vatican banks scandal.
Oh,
And,
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And that is apparently why Luciani, Wojtyła's predecessor in the usurpation, was dead after only 34 days. And they had this big cover story. Oh, he had these illnesses and he kept quiet about it and all this stuff. No, he got burned real bad by this Vatican bank scandal. He wanted to find out who was involved. The Masonic Register of Italy had been ordered by the Italian government to publish a roster of all of its members in 1977. And many high-ranking Vatican officials were on that list. So Luciani, John Paul I, drew up a list of people to be shipped out of the Vatican. One of the most notorious, Hannibal Bugnini, who was the author of this new mass, was sent to Iran, and which was a real exile for him. And another one of the people that was going to be shipped out was Cardinal Veto, the Vatican Secretary of State, apparently the last person to see him alive. And it's very likely he was given, a glass of water with some digitalis dissolved in it, and maybe a pillow over his head, who knows? But the fact of the matter is, David Yallop wrote in his book about that incident that the Vatican undertakers were parked below the Vatican apartment windows for 2 hours before it was announced, or before he supposedly died. He said, Yallop said that was one of the greatest examples of ESP in world history. And so they were ready to embalm him as fast as they could. I've been to Rome. I've talked to everybody from taxi cab drivers to Swiss guards to doctors, lawyers. Everybody said the same thing. Yeah, they murdered him. Of course they did. Everybody knows it's just an open secret there in Rome. And so then, actually, though, he was not the first choice of the liberals. They had wanted Wojtyła all along at that 78 conclave. There was an article in La Stampa in Rome saying that he was the obvious successor to Montini, Paul VI. But there was a group of cardinals that were blocking it. One of them was Paul Yupien of Taiwan, and also, of course, Syria. And there were three other cardinals: Cardinal Filipiak of Poland, and Cardinal Valerian Gracias of India. And I don't think they were going to be allowed to vote, but they certainly would have voiced their opposition to him. Gracias was at the 58 conclave. He knew Syria had been elected, and I knew a priest that was very, very friendly with Cardinal Gracias. And Filipiak would, like Cardinal Wyszynski, would have known that Wojtyła was in bed with the Polish communist government. Well, within the short time between Luciani's demise and Wojtyła's election, all three of those cardinals were dead. And they waited until Paul Yupien got out of his limo when he arrived from the airport, and he just dropped dead right there on the street when he got out of his car. So I heard. But I know he died during that time, so he didn't get the vote. They didn't want to kill Siri, though. They wanted to go through this sham election of him. And so they elected him again to make sure that Wojtyła would be elected invalidly at a second scrutiny, at a second ballot, after Siri had already been elected and accepted office. So they did this 4 times.
Why they chosen the Cardinal from Poland? Was it because of the Cold War and the United States and Russia situation? Was it the reason why they wanted it? It was like part of the plan?
I think he had been groomed for a long time. He had been very active at the council, which advanced the liberal agenda, and he was a main player. But he had the people perceived him to be very Marian, in other words, very much devoted to the Mother of God and all this stuff. That was just simply eyewash. That was just the Wojtyła's storefront, because he was a professional actor. Poland's Rhapsodic Theater, like Zelensky, is an actor.
Yeah, exactly. Garry,
so
I want to ask you.
And not only that, he was young, and they figured he'll be in there for a long time, and we get a lot done with him.
I want to ask you some questions that some people who watch might think that I'm crazy, but I have you here, and you have so much information, and you've gathered this throughout so many years of my life that I cannot not ask you those questions, but I really want to know.
Sure.
I don't know how you call this place in English. It's where they have masses in Vatican. And I've seen only images of it. I've seen the altar, right? And there is a sculpture above this altar that looks like a head of a snake or some kind of demon. I would like to know.
Actually, what you're talking about the audience hall. It's audience hall, okay?
Yes.
And if you, depending on how you aim the camera, if you look at from the stage to the placement and design of the windows, there's no doubt at all that's designed to resemble the head of a serpent. No doubt about it. You're not imagining that on you. Everybody that sees that, they're struck by this. And that hideous sculpture that's placed behind the chair where these fake popes have been sitting for the last several years. That was, by the way, the brainchild of Paul VI, who was a very despicable character. And so.
What year was this, Garry, when this was
That would have been built, I think that would have been built in the, probably the early 70s, something like that.
Okay, so now this is a straightforward question.
Sure.
Who are they really worshiping there?
Well, I mean, Our Lady told us, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. Catholics are going to have to come to grips with the fact that the visible structures of their church are under enemy occupation. That's what this is. Just like Americans are going to have to come to grips with the fact that their government in Washington is under enemy occupation. And I say this on interviews I go on. There's two things that if you understand about our government, then you'll have it all figured out. Number one, everything the government tells you is a lie. Number two, the government wants to kill you. Anybody that studied the COVID scam knows that. Well, similarly, the Vatican is lying through its teeth, and it wants to spiritually kill us because these people are working to prepare the way for Antichrist. And I say this, Anya, as a lifelong serious Catholic. You know, I go to Holy Communion. I attend the Mass. I broadcast through our live stream. It's stjudeshrine.tv. We send that live stream out worldwide, and we've been doing that for about 11 or 12 years now. So I mean, I'm really serious about this. But here's the thing: one of the primary purposes of this takeover was to get their people positioned where they could carry out changes in the sacraments to invalidate them. For instance, you know that when you baptize somebody, you pour the water and you say, I baptize you, whatever the name is, Susie or Johnny. in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Well, what if you said, I baptize you in the name of the Creator and the Redeemer and the Sanctifier? That would be invalid. That's not the wording that comes from sacred scripture. So you and I were taught in school that the sacrament requires a specific formula, specific matter, in the case of baptism, water, and intention. An intention by the person conducting the baptism to do what? To wash away the stain of original sin, which is what the church intends to do. Similarly, in the Eucharist, the priest has to intend to change the bread and wine at the altar into the body and blood of Christ. He has a specific formula given to us by Christ, as recorded in the Holy Scripture. He has to use bread and he has to use wine. Okay, you can't use hot dog buns or tortillas and Coca-Cola. Although some have tried to do that. And he has to
Are you
intend
serious?
to do.
Are you
Oh
serious?
yeah, oh yeah. This crazy stuff been going on for years. And so he has to intend to bring about this change that's done in an invisible way, but a change nonetheless that we know happens, because our Lord himself told us that we would eat his body and blood in commemoration of him, and that whoever does not eat the body and blood of the Son of Man shall not have eternal life. So it's not just a symbol. It's not a symbol. St. Paul made it very clear it was not a symbol. He said, anyone who eateth and drinketh the body and blood of the Lord without discerning the body and blood is guilty of the body and blood. So it's not just a symbol, but they've turned it into a symbol by invalidating holy orders. So they're not making valid priests anymore. They haven't consecrated any valid bishops now in over 50 years. So even if they wanted to offer, say, the old Latin Mass, couldn't do it validly because they don't even have valid priests. I would love somehow to meet Bishop Lenga in Poland. He really tells it like it is. But even I'm not sure. I don't think he was even consecrated validly. I could say that of Bishop Vigano as well, and Bishop Schneider, and even Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong. It's a tragedy. See, there's only a handful of valid bishops left, and the priest at our church is 89 years old, and sometimes he is assisted by another priest who flies in from out of state who's 96. That's what we've been reduced. This is what we've been reduced to.
Unbelievable.
And there's another youngster that helps out too. He comes in from out of state. He's only 93. So wow. We're hanging on fingernails.
Yeah.
And so Garry, what has to happen? So you want to know, how is this resolved? I'll tell you how this can be resolved. Okay. So none of those characters in the Sacred College are really cardinals. None of them were appointed by a true pope. They're not even bishops. Some of them aren't even priests. So the church has provided backup electors. St. Robert Bellarmine talks about it. Cardinal Cajetan talks about it. The great 20th century theologian, Monsignor Charles Journet, the historian, Father Paul Parada, and the backup electors are the clergy, in this case, the senior clergy of the local Church of Rome. They can elect the Pope. And Catholics need to become proactive in making this happen. And I know that there are many senior clergy in Rome that are scratching their heads about this about the Bergoglio character. And if they knew what some of us know, they would have already acted by now. Now, it could be that Bergoglio is on his way out pretty soon. I don't know. They will try to come up with somebody else even worse than he is. And my thinking is that they do, that'll be the last of it, because the scriptures talk about the seven-headed Hydra beast And I think there will ultimately be 7 of these monstrous, devilish anti-popes that have beguiled the whole world, but have invalidated the church's worship, doctrine, and tradition and discipline. They have overturned it. And so there's only a few churches like the one I'm sitting in that are still functioning as true Catholic churches with a true priest and a valid mass and sacraments. It's unbelievable. And, you know, we're on the outskirts of Houston, Texas here, kind of an unlikely place, you know. There's already been a lot of Catholics in Texas, but you would have thought something like this might happen in Chicago or St. Louis or something. Well, in fact, there were a lot of those groups in Chicago at one time, but all those priests I knew up there that were holding on to the old mass, they're all dead. They were born before our priest was, who's, as I say, 89.
Garry,
So,
you know, I want to ask you this. Have they been sacrificing children in Vatican?
you hear all kind of rumors. I mean, nothing would surprise me, Anya. I don't have any hard documentation, hard evidence. I know that diabolical sacrifice has been alleged to have occurred at the time of Montini's election back in 1963 in the Vatican. And it could be, I don't know. I can't say yes or no.
Thank you.
But I
Thank
wouldn't be
you.
surprised.
I
I
understand.
wouldn't say something unless I knew
Yeah.
for sure, you know.
Now that Vatican Bank, I've heard there was enormous amount of gold stored. Maybe still is, I'm not sure. How some people say it was removed, some people say it wasn't. I want to ask you how much you know about this, and does Vatican really still holds any power, in your opinion, in the situation in the world? Or the point of how relevant it is right now? Do you think it has that much saying as it did when I remember John Paul II was involved in that situation between Russia and US? How is it right now currently?
All I can really speak upon is where the gold or the money or whatever they had came from in the first place. You know that after the seizure of the Papal States, and the church's territory was reduced to just little confines of Vatican City, which was something that it needed to have a buffer zone around it so it could conduct its business safely. Later, when the Masonic governments were swept away during the Mussolini era, Mussolini entered into a concordat with the Vatican, I believe it was in 1929, and he didn't return the Papal States, but he gave the Vatican something like $80 billion. No, I'm sorry, not billion, million, $80 million. We throw those B's around like, you know, like they're millions.
Yeah.
But in any case, it was 80 million. Some say it was 70 million, but I think it was closer to 80 million. And so that began a new chapter in Vatican history. A man by the name of Garry was placed in charge of that money. And I have to say that I think it did have a corrupting influence. The Vatican got involved in a large pharmaceutical company that was manufacturing artificial contraceptives. This is something the church would be against. And so its very mission was corrupted by this money. And that came out back in the 60s. The Banco Ambrosiano scandal did involve Vatican Bank. Actually, 60 Minutes on the U.S. network, CBS, did a pretty good expose on that, and it was mostly interested in Roberto Calvi's murder at Blackfriars Bridge in London. And I won't go into all of the details, but I would say, yes, it has been a negative influence on the structures of the church, of the government of the church, even before it was taken over. And it could be that was part of the entry of certain subversive people into the Vatican, without whose help external powers could not have overthrown the Pope in the first place. So you can be sure that church was full of enemies right up until the death of Pope Pius XII.
Thank you for this, Garry. Now, I want to ask you about what is the Black Pope, what it is really, and who is the Black Pope, if there is any Black Pope now. If you can explain to someone who never came across this terminology, what it is and who it is.
The Black Pope is a nickname for the head of the Jesuits. Now, interesting, Bergoglio is a Jesuit. You know, back in the day, the Jesuit order was a very, very fine community within the church. It was the right hand of the Pope, and it was instrumental in bringing not only the faith, but Western civilization to the Guarani Indians and other indigenous people in South America. Did you ever see the movie The Mission? Did you ever see that movie?
Yes.
Okay. And that was really, I thought, a very accurate portrayal of the Jesuits. And then, of course, after they had built up these vast haciendas, plantations and rancheros, and they taught the Indians, or the native people, if you prefer, everything from animal husbandry to how to build fine musical instruments, which became highly prized by European orchestras. Well, the European powers became very jealous of these new competitors in mercantile trade, and they sent their armies by force. I'm talking about primarily Spain and Portugal, to wrest control of those facilities that was bringing great wealth to the native peoples in those South American countries and Central America. And it was primarily the work of the Jesuits, the Franciscans, and Augustinians. Some of the clergy actually took up arms to prevent that from happening, as was portrayed in that movie, The Mission. And most of them were killed. It was one of the darkest events in the New World, because it was such a scandal to those people. Many of them retreated into the hills and reverted back to their pagan customs. And you can thank the European power for that, who claimed to be Catholic. I mean, Spain and Portugal didn't join the Reformation, but they might as well have, because they were at war against the Pope over the control of these great centers that were built up by the religious orders for the new converts in the New World, and it was just absolutely despicable what they did. Well, the Bourbons finally put pressure on Pope Innocent XIV, Cardinal Ganganelli, to suppress the Jesuits. The order that had been, after all, founded by Saint Ignatius Loyola, and suppressed they were for 90 years. And when they came back, it was a whole new association, a whole new personnel. It simply was not the same organization. And you fast forward to the 20th century under Pedro Arrupe, who was the Father General of the order. It became a very subversive organization. Even Malachi Martin wrote a book called The Jesuits about how subversive they were. He should have known, because he was subversive himself. But that was when he was trying to build his credentials as a born-again traditional Catholic. But in any case, I knew some Jesuit priests who were good men, some who've offered Mass here, and they were kind of like orphans. They were sort of exiled and just left the order they retained the knowledge and that they received by their Jesuit training, but they did not like the direction that the order was going in. I was supposed to go to a Jesuit high school. I had made, this is way back in the early 60s. I had passed my entrance exams. I had a stack of books in my blazer and everything the first day. I don't know, Anya, but I was just like you. I had a horrible gut feeling about that place. And I came home that day. I'll never forget, it was on August 28, 1963. And I begged my parents, I said, do not do this. Do not send me there. And so I ended up going to public high school, and I retained my Catholic faith. Most of those guys I know, though, that I stayed in touch with, that went to the Jesuit high school, they all lost their faith, all of them.
So is the Black Pope, is it like a shadow, like shadow government in US?
Mm-hmm.
Is the Black Pope like a shadow Pope, kind of?
Well, there's an old Italian prophecy that says the white Pope and the Black Pope shall die the same night. It could refer to, the Black Pope could refer to an anti-Pope. But I don't know of any one person right now identified as the Black Pope. It may be some occult thing that I'm not aware of. I don't know everything. But my interpretation of that is a Black Pope refers to an anti-Pope. And by the way, speaking of anti-Pope, let me see if I can find it. Okay. This is a book that's published by the Vatican every year. It's called the Annuario Pontificio. This is for the year 2005. In March,
that's when I moved to United States. Can you believe it? How significant.
In that year, Wojtyła was in charge. Okay.
Right, correct.
So in the first part of the book, they have the names of all the popes going back to St. Peter up to the present time. Well, I'm going to show you something. I've highlighted these in yellow. They also have the names of all the anti-popes, or at least the main ones, listed in this book. So anybody that tells you, oh, there's no such thing as anti-popes, this is published by the Vatican every year. And we have their chronological histories. During the Great Western Schism, there were 4 of these guys.
What does it mean, really? What does it mean?
Anti-pope? Anti-pope. It means someone who's unlawfully claiming the office of Peter against the rightful claims of a true pope. And for the first 31 years of after Siri's election, he was alive, and as long as he was alive, they could not go and elect somebody valid, and because he was overthrown illegally. And so just to make sure, though, that his acquiescence didn't amount to an abdication, they kept electing him again and again, 4 times. Well, by the time he died, and this is another thing, I was telling you about the H-bomb threat on the Vatican. So he died on May 2nd, 1989. And by November 1989, they tore down the Berlin Wall and they declared the Cold War over. They didn't need it anymore. You see, whatever threat was sufficient to drive the Pope off the chair of Peter was sufficient to keep him off. And they used the threat of nuclear annihilation and the Cold War as a mechanism of intimidating not only the true Pope, but the cardinals that elected him, to keep their mouths shut. And Siri said many times, he was interviewed by the Frenchman Louis Remy in 1985. It was finally published in this country in English in 1987, entitled "The Pope, Could He Be Cardinal Siri?" And Siri said to Remy, he said, "I am bound by the secret." And as I said before, I could have written books about the various conclaves. Many horrible things have happened, but as it is, I can say nothing. He's not talking about the seal that they promise not to divulge anything that goes on in the conclave. No, 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 no. This was a criminal violation of that election of the cardinals. And no seal can protect a criminal act. He's talking about something else. He's talking about threat that was brought to bear against the church. And if he had dared divulged it, and he wasn't worried about getting killed himself, but they would have unleashed Armageddon on the church. That's what he was led to believe in any case. I don't know that that would have happened, but that's what he apparently thought. And so whatever it was sufficient to keep him quiet all that time. So then after that, well, by 2005, there weren't any valid bishops, and hence there were no valid cardinals to elect Wojtyła's successor. So they elected Ratzinger, also hailed as this great traditionalist restorer of all the old customs of the church. But he's the guy, announcing the coming of a new Messiah. I mean, this is insane. It strikes right at the core of Christian belief that Jesus Christ was the sole and unique fulfillment of the prophecies of the coming Messiah, Redeemer and Savior of mankind, given to us by the Old Testament sages. And there is none other. He's not one of many. Either he was or he wasn't. He's not one of many. And he was the Savior of all mankind, come for all time. He's not coming back as the Messiah, though. When he comes back, it'll be to judge the world. This is what these people don't seem to understand. I mean, have they ever picked up a Bible and read any of it? And so this is why we are in the mess we're in, I do believe, because when you remove sanctifying grace by removing the sacraments, and you cause a darkening of the intellect of 400, 500 million Catholics worldwide, and although they might not have made up the majority of the population of this country, for instance, they still were about 40%. And they had a great influence on this country. They were like a leaven in society. Well, nowadays, modern Catholics, they just believe whatever the common ideas lead them today. I mean, they're all for divorce, abortion, sodomy. It's okay. It's all okay. I met Scott Ritter a few days ago. He came to Houston, gave a speech, and I saw him on your show. And I really like Scott, and I appreciate his analysis of what's going on in Ukraine. But I don't agree with him on his tolerance of sodomy, because just think about what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. When you have a whole society that's given over to unnatural acts, you're looking at the collapse of civilization. Most historians say it took the Romans 350, 500 years to collapse. It depends on which historian you believe, okay? But all of them are in agreement that ancient Greece, it went through a decline that was so rapid, it occurred from the pinnacle of its prestige and power to rock bottom in only one generation. What was the difference? Well, the difference was the ancient Greeks institutionalized sodomy. And this is always what civilizations have done when they were in decline. And we are pushing this with a vengeance. I mean, it's so bad now where they're pushing all this transgender and genital mutilation ideology on children. Is so bad now that now even ultra liberal libertines like Bill Maher and Jimmy Dore saying they've gone too far. I can't go along with this. Too far. And so with the church being absolutely stone cold silent on this, or what they perceive to be the church, everything is going down the tubes, morally speaking. And when you pull that rug out from under your civilization, everything collapses. And so, I mean, at least I got to take my hat off to the Russians. They not only did they put in their constitution some years ago that the Russian Federation is a Christian nation, but if you recall, they had a referendum a couple of years ago in which they defined matrimony as a union between a man and a woman. And they don't have a gay pride parade in Moscow. Don't allow it. They've passed an ordinance outlawing it for 100 years. So, I mean, do you think something like that would happen in this country? I don't think so. And we're a nation in decline. And so now this brings to mind what the Mother of God said to the Fatima children.
Fatima, yes, and Fatima.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about Russia would spread her errors all over the world. Well, on another talk show, I was saying that Russia had an abortion tolerance problem going back to the 1700s during the time of Peter the Great, and it continued. And finally, when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917, they legalized it in 1920. But even they realized that it was destroying their future workforce. And so they had to start restricting it just 4 years later because, no workers paradise. So even they got that. But we don't seem to get it. And this country is jumping headlong into its own destruction. And I know that Scott Ritter, that he's proud to defend his country. And, I was in the military too, I did that 50 years ago. But what country do we have now to fight for and to defend? Because it's just simply being lost like, water in our hands. And we can't seem to get a handle on this. And the foundation of the morality of the nation is its Christian roots. And that's shored up by the church. If the church has been taken away, or worse, if it's been replaced by a counter church, a fake church, an institution that's actually setting the stage for the unveiling of the man of sin, well, then we're in a world of hurt. We're in a real bad. And, and I mean, Anya, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg on this.
Yes,
I could go into so much detail.
Yeah,
and believe me, you're going to be one of the first people that gets the copy of the Plot Against the Pope.
Thank you. But Garry, I want to say this, besides my enormous gratitude for your time today and all these informations, I think we will end this here, and very much likely we will connect for another chat too. I would like to know this book that you mentioned, yours, is it already published or is soon to be published? When people can expect this book? Because definitely I want to talk about it when it's ready.
Actually, you can read some of the beta versions of the chapters now and you're going to have to overlook some of the typos at a website that's operated by a friend of mine. It's whitesmoke1958.com.
Okay.
And you can see some of those chapters. Now, I'll tell you this also. I was asked to write this article, Grave Reasons of State, for the Italian journal Chiesa Viva. I wrote this about 6 years ago, and there's a picture of Cardinal.
This is the one that you emailed to me, correct?
I sent you a PDF. That's right.
Yes.
Or I sent you a link to a PDF. That's right. And this is only one part of the thing, But that can be made available right away. If people are interested, they will get the crux of this story by looking at some of these chapters, and we can make that available right away. And I'm working with editors right now, and we're correcting the various typos and syntax and other things. And
so what I'm going to do, Garry, you know what I'm going to do? That
What's
PDF that you send me, I will, to everyone who's joined my mailing list, I will mail to them directly. So they can read it. They can read it. And there is quite a lot of people who are part of that. So I just want to make sure that it's not going to be, if I put under the YouTube videos, I know that could create the problem because it picks up the it picks up certain words. So I cannot really put the link down the video, but I can email this to people directly. Now, can you tell me about the book time frame, like, for people to actually have the entire book?
My editors are hoping to get it out in 2023. I hope I live long enough to see that happen. I try never to use an electric toothbrush.
Okay.
I want to say this, that I've turned to you, Anya, because I am given no platform with hardly any of the traditional Catholics, because they think I'm disloyal against the papacy, or I'm just wacko, or Cardinal Siri didn't measure up to their standards. And I don't know what culpability he deserves in this episode. I don't know. I'm going to leave that up to God. All I'm trying to do is discover an explanation that makes sense about why the Catholic Church seemed to do a disappearing act. And in fact, even worse, they were replaced by something that was totally hostile to it. And so I've gone to people like you now, who are very much against the regime change mania that's going on right now. And of course, let's face it, the Ukraine war is really the war of the West trying to bring about a regime change in Russia. It's not working out that way, is it? Our Lady of Fatima said that Russia would become heaven's instrument to punish a sinful world. She said that. She also asked that the Pope consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart. And she asked that in 1929. So far, it has not happened. And now we don't have a visible Pope to do it. She did say, though, the Pope will do it, but he will be late. She said many nations, however, will be annihilated. And I think if we want to know which nations are going to be annihilated, it's probably going to be the membership roster of NATO. Because, Anya, they're not going to be happy after Russia's total victory over Ukraine. They will continue some kind of a guerrilla operation against the Russians until finally they push it just too far. And then we're going to see NATO headquarters get blown up. And then we're going to see ICBMs crossing the Atlantic Ocean, or crossing the North Pole. There's a very, very creepy video on Vesti News with the Russian news anchor, Dmitry Kisilov, in which he talks about these missile launchers in Romania and Poland, which was ostensibly put there by the US to defend Europe against Iran. The Russians have never believed that. And Putin says, at the first hint that a missile has been launched from those sites, not only are we going to take out those launch pads, but we're going to go after the command centers in the USA where those launches were ordered. And they have this real creepy map with the USA spelled out in Cyrillic alphabet, showing the two coasts of the continental US and where the Russian subs are located, parked right outside of the US territorial waters. And they identify Fort Ritchie, Maryland, Camp David, Maryland, and the Pentagon on the East Coast, and McClellan, California, and Jim Creek, Washington on the West Coast or left coast. And Kisilov says that they'll simply fire these Zircon missiles that will hit their targets in 5 minutes because they're flying 7,000 miles an hour. Cannot be intercepted, cannot be stopped. Will that end it? I don't think so. And so I do believe that part of the prophecy of Our Lady of Fatima will probably come to fruition, because her request that people turn away from their sinful ways I don't think it's been, obviously it hasn't been followed. and the consecration of Russia didn't take place. But I do believe eventually Russia will be a very positive force, Christian force in the world. I do believe it will be converted. I mean, it already is officially a Christian nation, but to go all the way, it has to, in my opinion, they got to do away with abortion, like El Salvador and many other countries have done, respect the life of the innocent unborn. And then I think they will have heaven's protection. And I think that we'll see a great cooperation between the church and Russia. And I think we'll see Christian unity after that. The prophecies of the saints are very vague about what happens to this country. And for myself, living in Texas, I hope our Texas legislature grows a backbone and just tells Washington District of Criminals, we're out of here. We're going to revert back to a separate country like we were from 1836 to 1845. And maybe we would not, fall under the hammer of Russian ICBMs. I don't know. I know this is very serious subject, and maybe it freaks out your viewers.
No, I know it is, but I also know that this is where the true faith comes in. And with all of this, what you're saying, which I respect very much, every single word, call me naive, call me however you want to call me. I have enormous amount of faith in me. I'm not saying it will be easy. I am aware of difficulties ahead of us, enormous, but we are here in this time for a reason. And that I truly trust God. I do. Even though in this reality, it doesn't look like it will improve, I do believe that we will get through this, and we are very important in this time of history. Even those conversations like this are very important. And that's what I feel in my heart.
And I'm glad to hear that. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, so the viewers won't think I'm a total wacko. I am a married man, have been married 47 years. I have 8 adult children. I have soon to be 19 grandchildren. I've worked as a commercial artist, a portrait artist. I've done portraits of 3 US presidents. Copies have been sold all over the country. I was an industrial designer. I'll send you some pictures of some of those projects. I did that for many, many years. I built scale models, design models of chemical plants. And so, I mean, I had a life other than this. But this was always there, because I thought somebody's stolen our church. And I'm not happy about that. If there's something I can do to get it back, I feel obliged to do what I can, And I'm so glad that I stumbled onto your program, and I've subscribed right away. I've been watching ever since.
Thank you so much. And I try my best because my guests are so incredible, and sometimes I feel it's like out of my league. But I also believe that when I surround myself with people who know more, experience more, I'm learning also. So I am growing, that's how I look at it.
Well, I'll tell you what, if I get to Poland, I hope you could be my interpreter with Bishop Linga. I'd really like to meet him. I don't know if you ever listen to any things, but he's in big trouble with the powers that be because he tells it like it is, He blasted the Polish bishops for closing up the churches over a flu epidemic. What kind of nonsense is that? By the way, this church here stayed open during the entire engineered pandemic. We never closed one Sunday. We didn't pass out masks.
That was a test. I remember exactly when I was in the United States still. I came here a few months ago, and I remember how many of those churches were requiring certain things or were closed, or when they were open, like what they were requiring, right? But Garry, we will end this conversation here. Tell me before, the last thing is, would you like people to support you in some way? What is the best way to help you somehow, or to contribute to your work or to the church?
Well, of course, those two are separate. If they would like to look at the website that our editors have set up, it's called theplotagainstthepope.com. Theplotagainstthepope.com. And it's still under construction, but there's enough information there where you can see what we're up to. And if they want to be put on a mailing list, that's a good place to do it. And then I can send them information where they can watch our church's live stream. I look forward to hearing from anyone who's interested in it. And you don't even have to be a Catholic to be interested in this subject, really.
Okay.
And
any way to support the church as well? Do you have any website or?
Yeah, they could go to St. Jude Shrine.tv.
Can you spell the last part?
Spelled out, SaintJudeshrine.tv. And that website has a plethora of information on it. Oh my goodness. And if they'd like to make contributions there, they can. And that will link them to our live stream on Sundays and holy days. And it's right out of 1955, Anya. It's like a time machine. And
I like time machines.
A better time, a time that I remember when I was in school, a much happier time. That was the year that the Austrians had kept their churches open for 7 years, praying the rosary that the Soviet occupiers would leave their country. And sure enough, in that year, the Soviets picked up and left Austria. And Austria was a non-aligned nation up to that point, up until now. And now it looks like it's aligning now against the Russians. But only God knows where that's going to end up.
I think we might connect again because there are other things I would like to discuss with you. But for today, I will say thank you. God bless. Thank you for all your work. This is truly life commitment. There are no coincidences in our lives.
I'm not just pulling this stuff out of a hat. I've been over to Europe, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. I've interviewed former secretaries of the Cardinals, former Vatican officials. I'm not just blowing smoke. I've researched this, and others have researched it with me. The amount of footnotes, like I have one, the one on John the 23rd is called Good Pope John. It's only 23 pages long, and there's like 72 footnotes in there. It's massively documented. So
thank you, Garry. Thank you. That's welcome. A lot. I mean, first of all, I will say goodbye for now, and those of you who are still watching, because this is a pretty lengthy conversation, I say again, I'm going to send this video with attached PDF that Garry sent me to all of those who are on my mailing list, so you can click on it, and then every other link that Garry mentioned will be down below the video. So to the church and the plotagainstthepope.com, all of this you find, guys, down below the video. Thank you so much, Garry, for your time today, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Anya.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And if it brings you value and resonates with your heart, click that like button, so it helps with YouTube as well.